Welcome everybody. Today we're going to continue with Kant. In whatever way and through whatever means a cognition may relate to objects, that through which it relates immediately to them, and at which all thought as a means is directed as an end is intuition. So B, intuition is opposed to the concept, which is merely the mark of intuition. The universal must be given in the peculiar through that it has significance. Okay. This, however, takes place only insofar as the object is given to us. But this in turn is possible only if it affects the mind in a certain way. The capacity, receptivity to acquire representations through the way in which we are affected by objects is called sensibility. Objects are therefore given to us by means of sensibility, and it alone affords us intuitions. But they are thought through the understanding, and from it arise concepts. But all thought, whether straight away or through a detour indirect, must ultimately be related to intuitions, thus in our case to sensibility, since there is no other way in which objects can be given to us. The effect of an object on the capacity for representations, insofar as we are affected by it, is sensation. The intuition, that intuition which is related to the object through sensation, is called empirical. The undetermined object of an empirical intuition is called appearance. I call that in the appearance which corresponds to sensation its matter, but that which allows the manifold of appearance to be intuited or so ordered in certain relations, I call the form of appearance. Since that within which the sensations can alone be ordered and placed in a certain form cannot itself be in turn sensation, the matter of all appearance is only given to us a posteriori, but its form must lie already in the mind a priori, and can therefore be considered separately from all sensation. I call representations pure in the transcendental sense, in which nothing is to be encountered that belongs to sensation. Accordingly, the pure form of sensible intuition in general is to be encountered in the mind a priori, wherein all of the manifold of appearance is intuited in certain relations. This pure form of sensibility itself is also called pure intuition. So, if I separate from the representation of a body that which the understanding thinks about it, such as substance, force, divisibility, etc., as well as that which belongs to sensation, such as impenetrability, hardness, color, etc., something from this empirical intuition is still left for me, namely extension and form. These belong to the pure intuition, which occur a priori, even without an actual object of the senses or sensation, as a mere form of sensibility in the mind. I call a science of principles of a priori sensibility the transcendental aesthetic. There must therefore be such a science, which constitutes the first part of the transcendental doctrine of elements, in contrast to that which contains the principles of pure thinking, and it's named transcendental logic. So, we have a star here. The Germans are the only ones who now employ the word aesthetic to designate that which others call the critique of taste. The ground for this is a failed hope, yet held by the excellent analyst Baumgarten, of bringing the critical estimation of the beautiful under principles of reason, and elevating its rules to a science. But this effort is futile, for the putative rules or criteria are merely empirical as far as their sources are concerned, and can therefore never serve as a priori rules according to which our judgment of taste must be directed. Rather, the latter constitutes the genuine touchstone of the correctness of the former. For this reason, it is advisable again to detest or desist from the use of this term, and to save it for that doctrine which is true science, whereby one would come closer to the language of the senses of the ancients, among whom the division of cognition into asthetai kai neta noeta. Aestheta kai noeta. Okay. The other thing is that we have this principin, which is the B and C in this section. Okay. In the transcendental aesthetic, we will therefore first isolate sensibility by separating it off from that the understanding thinks through its concepts, so that nothing but empirical intuition remains. Second, we will then detach from the latter everything that belongs to sensation, so that nothing remains except pure intuition and the mere form of appearance, which is the only thing that sensibility can make available a priori. In this investigation, it will be found that there are two pure forms of sensible intuition as principles of a priori cognition, namely space and time, with the assessment of which we will now be concerned. The Transcendental Aesthetic, first section, on space. Just seeing how much there is in this section. So it goes up to B46. B42. Yeah, it goes for around about a few pages. Let's see how I get on. By means of outer sense, a property of the mind, of our mind, we represent ourselves, objects as ourselves, outside us, objects as outside us, and all as in space. In space, their form, magnitude, and relation to the another is determined, or determinable, in our sense by means of which the mind intuits itself, or its inner state gives, to be sure, no intuition of the soul itself, as an object. Yet it is still a determinate form under which the intuition of its inner state is alone possible, so that everything that belongs to the inner determinations is represented in relations of time. Time can no more be intuited externally than space can be intuited as something in us. Now, what are space and time? Are they actual entities? Are they only determinations or relations of things? Yet ones that would pertain to them even if they were not intuited? Or are they relations that only attach to the form of intuition alone, and thus to the subjective constitution of our mind, without which these predicates could not be ascribed to anything at all? In order to instruct ourselves about this, we will consider first space. Space is not an empirical concept that has been drawn from outer experience. For in order for certain sensations to be related to something outside me, to something in another place in space from that in which I find myself, thus in order for me to represent them as outside one another, thus not merely as different, but as in different places, the representation of space must always be their ground. Thus, the representation of space cannot be obtained from the relations of outer appearance through experience, but this outer experience is itself first possible only through this representation. So, space is not a concept, but an intuition. Space is a necessary representation, a priori, which is the ground of all outer intuitions. One can never represent that there is no space, although one can very well think that there are no objects to be encountered in it. It is therefore to be regarded as the condition of the possibility of appearances, not as a determination dependent on them, as is an a priori representation that necessarily grounds their appearances. The apodictic certainty of all geometrical principles and the possibility of their a priori construction are grounded in this a priori necessity. For if this representation of space were a concept acquired a posteriori, which was drawn out from a general outer experience, the principles of mathematical determination would be nothing but perceptions. They would therefore have all the consistency of perception, and it would not even be necessary that only one straight line lie between 2 points. But experience would merely always teach that what is borrowed from experience always has only comparative universality, namely through induction. One would therefore only be able to say that, as far as been observed to date, no space has been found that has more than 3 dimensions. 4. Space is not a discursive or, as is said, general concept of relations of things in general, but a pure intuition. For first, one can only represent a single space, and if one speaks of many spaces, one understands by that only parts of one and the same unique space. And these parts cannot, as it were, precede the single all-encompassing space as its components, from which its composition would be possible, but rather are only thought in it. It is essentially single, the manifold in it. Thus also the general concept of space in general rests merely on limitations. From this it follows that in respect to it an a priori intuition, which is not empirical, grounds all concepts in them. Thus also all geometrical principles, that in triangle 2 sides together are always greater than the third, are never derived from general concepts of line and triangle, but rather are derived from intuition, and indeed derived a priori with apodictic certainty. Space is represented as a given infinite magnitude, a general concept of space, which is common to foot as well as an L, can determine nothing in respect to magnitude. If there were not groundless in the progression of intuition, no concept of relation could bring with a principle of their infinity. So we have 3 pages. Space represents conclusions from the above concepts. Space represents no property at all of any things in themselves, nor any relation of them to each other, no determination of them that attaches to objects themselves, and that would remain even if one were to abstract from all subjective conditions of intuition. For neither absolute nor relative determinations can be intuited prior to the existence of the things to which they pertain, thus be intuited a priori. Space is nothing other than merely the form of all appearances of outer sense, the subjective condition of sensibility under which alone outer intuition is possible for us. Now, since the receptivity of the subject is to be affected by objects, necessarily precedes all intuitions of these objects, it can be understood how the form of all appearances can be given in the mind prior to all actual perceptions. Thus, a priori and how, as a pure intuition, in which all objects must be determined, it can contain principles of the relations prior to all experience. We can accordingly speak of space, extended beings, and so on, only from the human standpoint. If we depart from the subjective condition under which alone we acquire outer intuition, namely that through which we may be affected by objects, then the representation of space signifies nothing at all. This predicate is attributed to things only insofar as they appear to us, i.e., are objects of sensibility. The constant form of this receptivity, which we call sensibility, is a necessary condition of all the relations within which objects can be intuited as outside us. And if one abstracts from these objects, it is a pure intuition, which bears the name of space. Since we cannot make the special conditions of sensibility into conditions of this possibility of things, but only of their appearances, we can well say that space comprehends all things that may appear to us externally, but not only things in themselves, whether they be intuited or not, by whatever subject they may be intuited. For we cannot judge at all whether the intuitions of other thinking beings are bound to the same condition that limit our intuition and that are universally valid for us. If we add the limitation of a judgment to the concept of the judgment, then the judgment is unconditionally valid. The proposition, quote, all things are next to one another in space, is valid only under the limitation of these things be taken as objects of our sensible intuition. If here I add the condition to the concept and say all things as outer intuitions are next to one another in space, then this rule is valid universally and without limitation. Our expositions accordingly teach the reality, i.e., objective validity of space in regard to everything that can come before us externally as an object. But at the same time, the ideality of space in regard to things when they are considered in themselves through reason, without taking account of the constitution of our sensibility. We therefore assert the empirical reality of space, with respect to all possible outer experience. Though, to be sure, at the same time, its transcendental ideality, that it is nothing as soon as we leave out the condition of the possibility of all experience, and take it as something that grounds the things in themselves. Besides space, however, there is no other subjective representation related to something external that could be called a priori objective. Hence, this subjective condition of all outer appearances cannot be compared with any other. The pleasant taste of wine does not belong to the objective determinations of the wine, thus of an object even considered as an appearance, but rather to the particular constitution of sense in the subject that it enjoys. Colours are not objective qualities of the bodies to the intuition of which they are attached, but are also only modifications of the sense of sight, which is affected by light in a certain way. Space, on the contrary, as a condition of outer objects, necessarily belongs to the appearance of intuition. Taste and colours are by no means necessary conditions, under which alone the objects can be objects to the senses for us. They are only combined with the appearance as contingently added effects of the particular organization. Hence they are not a priori representations, but are grounded on sensation, and pleasant taste is even grounded on feeling of pleasure and displeasure as an effect of the sensation. And no one can have a priori the representation either of a colour or of a taste, but space concerns only the pure form of intuition. Thus it includes no sensation, nothing empirical in itself, and all kinds of determinations of space can and even must be able to be represented a priori if concepts of shapes as well as relations arise through space alone. Is it possible for things to be outer objected for us? The aim of this remark is only to prevent one form of thinking of illustrating the asserted ideality of space with completely inadequate examples, since things like colour, taste, are correctly considered not as qualities of things, but as mere alterations of our subject, which can even be different in different people. For in this case, that which is originally itself only appearance counts in an empirical sense as a thing in itself, which yet can appear different to every eye in regard to colour. The transcendental concept of appearances in space, on the contrary, is a critical reminder that absolutely nothing that is intuited in space is a thing in itself, and that space is not a form that is proper to anything in itself, but rather that objects in themselves are not known to us at all, and that what we call outer objects are nothing other than mere representations of our sensibility, whose form is space, but whose true correlate, the thing in itself, is not and cannot be cognized through them, but it is also never asked after an experience. Okay. We will continue till next time. Take care.